What's up guys, Jeremy here with Shine Supply. In today's video, we're gonna go over our complete trim conditioning lineup. We're gonna break down the differences between all our trim products, trim paint, trim shield, trim sauce, and the new BEADLOCK Trim. We're gonna give you guys some insight on when you would select one of those products according to what the needs of your trim are. Let's go. So what I've done to start off with is I've taped off sections of the front bumper on this Jeep Wrangler. You can see we have some severe staining right here on the corner. It starts to kind of fade off into here, and then over here we just have some traditional fading. So it'll be a little trial and error to see what the products are capable of, but we're gonna apply each of those products in these 4 sections. We'll be able to compare. And then we're also gonna bring this Jeep back in about 6 months and we'll do a wash on it and kind of see what's holding. I mean, we know right off the bat that trim sauce will go first, and we'll get into why and the differences in a little bit. But let's do a walk around on this and kind of look at what we're dealing with the trim. Because up front, we do have that heavy staining, but this mirror's not too bad. We just have some typical light oxidation. And then if you come around here to the back bumper, we're still in the middle of kind of prepping this. But over here, we've done a little bit of beadlock trim already on this corner. You can see this is what we were starting with. This license plate holder is super faded. And then you jump up here to this taillight housing, it's not as bad. We're gonna dress and coat several different pieces of trim on this and see what the results look like. So let's get into the differences of these products. Let's start with our BEADLOCK Trim. This is our newest product. This is a ceramic coating for your trim. We are expecting this to last a minimum of 12 months. The only variable to that would be if you are in extreme harsh conditions, it might be a little less, but you can expect to get that type of longevity out of this product. Trim sauce. This is a water-based trim conditioner. This is the least expensive in the lineup. It's $18 for a pint. Being that it is water-based, this is gonna last 1 to 2 washes. It's just a quick, easy, very straightforward product, perfect for maintenance. If you want something more affordable and you're willing to apply it often, trim sauce is a great choice. Being that it is water-based, it does break down very quickly with water, but the application is extremely easy, meaning if you get a little bit on the paint, it wipes right off. Very simple, very straightforward trim sauce. Next is our trim shield. So this is $48 for a bottle. The reason why this is a step up in price from the trim sauce is that this is solvent based. So it's not water soluble. It takes a lot longer to break down. Another unique thing about trim sauce is this product actually absorbs into the pores of the trim and helps to restore and hydrate the trim. Whereas trim sauce is more kind of makeup. It just dulls up the top of the trim, doesn't really absorb in and hydrate the pores of the trim. So that will help you know what to select between these two. Longevity wise of trim shield, we can get months out of this product, especially if you initially hydrate your trim with it. Your trim's a little more dried out and you apply it a couple times, it will really start to restore that trim and you will get months out of this product. I think probably the maximum I've seen it last is about 3 months. Now, trim paint is a completely different product. Even though it's for the trim, it's totally different than these items over here. Trim paint is actually a water-based paint. You could look at it just like a water-based paint you would put on the wall at your house. So trim paint black is for when your trim is completely faded. It's almost got like a very white, ashy look, very similar to what we're dealing with here. But even on more extreme cases than that, I'm not sure if some of you have seen it, but in my detailing career, I've seen sometimes running boards, they can get what we call like zebra striping in it, where you see these white stripes where the trim has just completely faded and it's beyond any type of repair with a trim conditioning or a trim coating product, that's where your trim paint would come in. Now, that will be something that you might have to do a test spot, meaning you start with a trim conditioning product, maybe even the coating, and see if the trim is able to be revived with a product like this. If not, that's when you resort to the trim paint. So you'll have to use your own discretion on when this is fitting for where your trim's at, okay? We're gonna get into application in all these in a few minutes, but I hope that gives you guys a nice overview into why you would select one of those products. Okay, let's get into application. What do you think we should start with? Let's start with the sauce, the trim sauce. Again, this is the water base. It's the easiest application of the lineup, and it is the least expensive, but it also lasts the less amount. It also lasts the least amount of time. Oh, thank you, sir. All right, no need to shake it up. This is almost a gel type product. We're gonna apply, actually before, so you guys know what this is our soft, black, smooth surface applicator we sell on the site. I really like this for application of the trim product. I also use this for dressing tires, is being that the surface is very smooth, it doesn't pull the product back off the surface as you're applying, where like a longer nap applicator will tend to pull the product back up. I strongly suggest these, they're excellent. Let's just put a little product on here. Let's do this section with the trim sauce. You can already see we're not really getting anywhere with it, which that's not a knock on the product. That's why we have several different options, because this is going to have its limitations. Now, let's walk over here while I still have the trim sauce, and let's try it on this mirror that's not half as bad as that bumper. Let's see what the results we get on this. Put a little bit more, get a good look at that. This amount should cover the whole mirror. So look at that, that looks great. Super easy application. I could come down here, get this housing part. You're gonna get a little overlap on your paint. You just take a microfiber towel, it wipes right off. But you can see how simple the trim sauce is in its application. That was a great fit for that mirror. Okay, next up, let's do some trim shield. We'll apply it on this section and see what we look like. Now, you can see I'm switching applicators for this to this sponge. The reason we do this, being that this product is a little more expensive, something that'll help save you money, is that you get one of these applicator sponges. After you use the trim shield, take a Ziploc bag, put your applicator in that Ziploc bag. It stays loaded up with the product, and then the next time you go to use it, you don't have to use so much product because you have the same applicator that's already loaded up with trim shield. Now this one, don't get crazy with squirting this out. Just get some light. I mean, this is a new applicator, so I might go a little heavier. I think it's got a heat seal on it we're gonna have to take off right now. Make sure you remove that first. So you see, you don't need to squeeze it or anything, just pour some product out on here. We're gonna put it on this section. As you can see already, we're getting a better response than the trim sauce. Now with this one, I'd like you to take some elbow grease and really work this in, because remember, the trim shield is absorbing, and because of the solvents in it, it bites into the trim and it wants to hydrate the trim, by soaking into the pores of the trim, where trim sauce is just sitting on the top. So really work this in. And I have put this on vehicles over the years where I do one application, it looks pretty good. I'll give it like 10, 15 minutes, go work on something else on the car, and I'll come back and do a second application, and the trim will look perfect. So it was so dried out, it needed 2 applications. All right, at this point, if this is a vehicle I was working on at our detail shop. I'm not happy with that result. Definitely not happy with that result being how faded this trim is. So now it would be an option between the BEADLOCK Trim. We'll see how that is going to revive the trim. And the last resort would be trim paint, which I think that's what's going to be needed because of just how faded and stained this trim is. Keep in mind, you guys at home or professionals out there, I'm not saying you get on a job and you tape off sections and see what works. You could just take like a corner of the trim and troubleshoot a little bit with these different products, you know, do a little small area, and you'll see what's gonna be fitting and what the trim needs to restore, okay? Okay, next up, trim paint. Let me give you a few tips on how to use trim paint. Now keep in mind, I'm sure many of you have all painted a wall at some time. Now think about when you dip your brush into the paint and you paint, you know, you do your strokes on the wall, you're going to see brush marks. And the only way you would avoid that is if you put that paint in a sprayer and sprayed the paint on the wall. So now take that same application process and relate it to trim paint. We are sponging this on. So the smoother the surface of the trim, you're going to see the wipe and the rub marks from the applicator. It's just part of the process. The only way that would be avoided is if you could somehow put this in an airbrush or a sprayer and spray it on, okay? So don't be alarmed by the fact when you apply trim paint, you can see your stroke marks where you put it on. Now, the smoother the trim surface, you will just have to be more intentional on your wipe marks, making sure they're real even and thorough, making sure your applicator is loaded with product, because as this gets somewhat dry, you will start pulling some of the paint up. Again, some of you that have painted the wall, you know what I'm talking about. As your brush runs out of paint, it will start pulling some of that paint off the wall that you have just laid down. So you always want to keep your brush real loaded with paint. In the same way, you want to keep your applicator really loaded with the trim paint so that it stays in a wet state, so you can really lay that product down and get it down really even. Now on this bumper on the Wrangler, it's pretty nice and textured, so I don't perceive us really seeing any kind of wipe marks. So if you are doing this where it's hot outside or you are more in direct sun, keep in mind, back to my analogy of painting the wall, if you have heat, higher temperature, what's gonna happen? This paint's gonna wanna dry up quicker. So you need to be real efficient in getting that first layer down so it doesn't start to dry up on you and you start to pull some of that paint off. So I'm gonna load this pretty heavy. I'm gonna rub it in and then I'm gonna do straight passes to make sure it's really even. And you'll feel it. It'll start to get grabby on you, and that's when you know it's starting to dry out. And you need to quickly move to this stage where you're just doing those straight passes, and that's how I'm gonna finish it out. And when you do that, if it's feeling grabby, you need to put a little more trim paint on your applicator. Now, some of you might think, well, could I use a paintbrush or like a paint sponge? I wouldn't use a paintbrush. I think that's gonna be kind of messy. We have at times used one of those little artist paint sponges you can get at Home Depot or Lowe's, and those are great for little tight areas. But I've had really good success with this short pile microfiber applicator pad with applying trim paint. Be creative, try different things. You might find it works with, you know, a different applicator, and we could learn something, all right? And if you do that, drop a comment and let us know what you're using it with. Let's go over some questions that I'm sure you will have regarding trim paint application and even the maintenance on it. So slide in closer with the camera. You can see it's starting to dry. Dry time is going to be completely dependent on the climate. So I don't know when you guys are applying this. It might be in the middle of the summer, it might be in the middle of the winter, but that's not what's really important. It's just visually watch it. You'll see it dry just like anything you've painted. You're gonna see when it goes from a wet state to a dry state. While it's drying, don't mess with it. Don't try to put some more on. That's when you'll really pull it up and you'll make it super splotchy. So let it dry all the way and then apply your second coat if you decide that it needs a second coat. Now, as far as trim paint maintenance, something I've done here at my detail shop, I've tried maintaining it with several different things: ceramic coating, trim shield, trim sauce. Personally, I've had the best success maintaining trim paint with trim sauce. What the paint's doing, it's kind of blocking off the pores of the trim, being that you've literally put paint down on it. So trim sauce is working best for me because it just kind of sits on the top and it leaves it really even. Where if you think about the breakdown I gave you guys on trim shield is wanting to absorb into the trim. So being now that we have paint on the trim, it's kind of rejecting the trim shield, wanting to absorb in. So the trim shield sits on the top and it looks really splotchy. I've never been real happy with the look that that gives. So if you've had to resort to trim paint, I recommend maintaining with trim sauce, you know, every couple weeks. And then once the paint kind of breaks down, I mean, we've gotten almost 2 years out of this before, but again, depending on what climate you're in, just, you know, strip it down with some alcohol, clean it up really good, and then just reapply your trim paint. Yeah, and if you messed up during your application of trim paint and it looked kind of splotchy, take some Terminator solvent. We sell that on our website, or you can get it kind of anywhere, and just wipe it all down with solvent. It'll wipe the trim paint right off, and you can let it dry. Follow it with like an alcohol wipe down just to make sure there's none of that residue from the Terminator, and just start over again. Okay, so you can see it has probably been about 5 minutes. It looks like our first coat has dried. I'll just lightly kind of touch it. There's no tack. I definitely want to put one more coat on that. Okay, now the second coat, I'm not going to do any rubbing, being that I've already put it on and kind of rubbed it into the surface. This, I just want to do nice, even passes and make sure my surface is as even as possible and I have a really good built up layer of trim paint on there. If you're doing this, again, just think that you're painting, because you are. You're not applying a trim conditioner, you're applying paint. So right here, it's kind of loaded up. I'm gonna do a couple more swipes, even that out. It's definitely helpful to do this in the shade. Gives me a little more work time. And then when you're done, this applicator, when it dries, it'll be rock hard because it is paint. You're gonna have to chuck it. You're not gonna get a second use out of that. Before I get into the beadlock trim, I'm gonna put one more coat of the trim shield on this section, see if that improves at all. Now, some of you might have the question of, well, if I see trim this bad, I'm just gonna automatically grab trim paint. I wouldn't do that, because the goal of maintaining your vehicle is to always preserve that factory look. And even though trim paint black, you know, looks really nice, you know, compared to how faded this was, you can tell that it's been repainted. It just doesn't look the same as factory. It looks good, but again, being that the goal is to preserve that factory look of the trim, make sure trim paint is your last resort when you know the trim is beyond being able to be conditioned and brought back with one of the other products. Okay, last up is the beadlock trim. So this comes in a kit. It's got a 50 ml bottle. It's got your applicator pad in here. This is called a saver applicator. It's got a barrier in the middle so the product doesn't absorb all the way through the sponge. So we're gonna pull this out, shake it up. And we're gonna be putting this in this section right there. I'm really curious to see what this will do for that area, considering how bad it is. You know, this will be the same. Any of you that have applied coating to a car on your applicator, kind of get it coming out. We're gonna go around the outside of the applicator, come through the middle. Now, I'm going a little heavier because it's a new applicator with no product on it, so I'm gonna go heavy on the first application, and then when I reapply, it's definitely a lot less than that. I always recommend just setting the lid on there so it doesn't absorb any air. And this, I'm gonna lay it down. I'm gonna do a little bit of rubbing to kind of work it into the surface. But I'll frame out my area first, and then come back in and rub it in. Now, being that I have paint right here, I'm gonna adjust my fingers and really tuck this down in that line. I don't wanna push too much product on there. I know I'm gonna get some on there, you know, and we'll go over that in a minute, but I wanna just really tuck that in instead of leaving the applicator open and then you're smearing it all on that panel. This little hook, I'll put some on there. Now, as soon as I get done applying the coating, being that I got some on this panel, which again, that will always happen, I'm gonna take a clean microfiber towel, tuck my pointer finger, hold the end of this, and just wipe off that residual that got on the paint. So I don't wanna let the coating start to dry at all on the paint. It'll make it a little bit more difficult at the end if I missed that on the paint and I had to go back and get a high spot off. If that happens when you're applying the trim coating, take some of our slick back primer polish. You can use the same towel, put a little dot of it on, and it'll rub that high spot right off. So that looks pretty good. Let's put a little bit more product down. Go over it one more time. Now, beadlock trim coating is very different from paint coating. I recommend you give this stuff at least 5 minutes to set up and absorb into the trim before you grab your towel and go back over it and level it off. And just very light pressure, light, quick, couple little white marks just to even it out, and you're done. It is very different than when you're leveling coating off paint where you're really thorough and making sure you have no high spots. It's not like that at all on trim. It's just a quick few passes, run over it with a towel to make sure it's even and it's good. Now, you will feel when you take that towel and go to even it out, you're gonna feel it kind of tacky and grabby. That's why I want light pressure. Don't feel like you need to smooth out that tacky feel. That is not the goal at all. You're gonna feel that. That's the product setting up. That's why I want that light pressure so your towel's not gonna grab a lot. Quick, wipe over, you're good, you're done. So you might think, well, what if I don't level it? Make sure you level it. If you don't level this product, you're most likely gonna deal with some unsightly residue, and you don't even wanna have to deal with that. Okay, so come in close. Let's give our final evaluation. I'm gonna pull this tape off. We'll do kind of an overview on our results. It's easy to see that trim paint definitely won as far as our results. That is what was the best option for this bumper, being that it started with this condition, just to refresh your guys' memory. So we got severe staining. All the pigment has gone out of the trim. Looks like something has got on it that really just drew all that black out of the trim. So being that we got it to there with paint, that was definitely the best choice for this bumper. You can see trim shield didn't do much. Trim shine did a little bit, and the coating looks about the same as trim sauce, but we know this look would hold for months and months and months and months, but that's definitely not ideal. So bumper this severe, trim paint was definitely the best choice. Now, come up close again, you can see how it's a little bit uneven in the finish. That's where after I apply trim paint, do some other things on the vehicle, give this at least a good 30 minutes to really make sure it's totally dry. And then before I deliver this vehicle to the customer, I would go over it with the trim sauce, apply some on with a sponge, kind of even it out with a microfiber towel if I felt like I didn't like how it looked after sponging it on. And this would look absolutely incredible. It would help even out some of those highs and lows from the paint. All right, guys, got the Jeep pulled in the shop. Gonna go ahead and wrap that up. I hope this video helped clear up any questions you have on our trim line. If you have any further questions and you want to know more information specifically on beadlock trim, make sure you check the link below and you can watch a full video on beadlock trim. We appreciate you guys watching. As always, leave us a comment, a question. We're happy to help. We'll see you next time.